I remember Lonnie Pittman used to make tapes up here. I'm on live, aren't I? Toast, toast, check. Toast and jam, check 1 and 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Do I need to put up higher? No? If you're picking it up pretty good, I think it'd be fine down here. Just a tad more, maybe. Toast. Toast and jam. Toast and jam.
Hey, man.
Hi.
Give you a book.
No, you're not giving me a book. I've already got that. Okay. Booster seat?
No, you left it last time 2 or 3.
Did I seriously? I did leave it last time. I was like, I've already got this. What are you talking about? Well, thank you very much. Now I have it again. The gift that literally keeps on giving. I mean, you think I'm good? Yeah, I think that's good. Anthony's the pro. Ryan, you want to start off or you just want me to go? It's time to go, man. I guess it is time. We're going to have to use every minute we can. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it very much. I'm looking forward to this afternoon. It's going to be a little bit long. We usually go, this is usually about 3 hours, but I hope it's going to be packed full of information for you. And so again, this is called, I call it my Active Digital Parenting Workshop, and I've been doing this at, I don't know, this is number 54 in 5 years. And so I've been doing this at a lot of different places, and it just kind of snowballed out of control. I didn't even realize how big of a thing it was becoming until I counted that I did 19 of these in 1 year. And so I've got 16. I had 16 scheduled. I think 2 of them next weekend dropped off. I had 2 scheduled next weekend. So people are canceling stuff right and left. So we'll have to see. But again, this is number 54. And we're going to do 3 sessions. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is my information. If you keep up with me, you can go to activedigitalparenting.com. That actually goes to my personal website. And every slide, every word, every download that I mention is going to be on that page. And so you can go to activedigitalparenting.com and it just redirects to my personal website. And again, you can actually email me there, chad@graymuir.com, if you have any questions. That first one is going to be, this first session we're going to be talking about why. A lot of the times, it's just getting us as parents and grandparents and guardians and people that are in charge of our kids' well-being and their digital well-being. It's just going to be us getting to pay attention and getting us energized and encouraged about this stuff, because so often it can just be another job. You just go, oh, I just don't want to deal with all this. I'll do it later. I don't want to, and later really never comes. It's kind of like all these people that are working from home and all the jokes I've been seeing the past week or so about people working from home. As imagine all the things you're going to get done. You're not going to get done any of them. You think you will, but you're not going to get done any of them. And it's kind of the same thing. You say, well, I'll do this later. Well, when later comes, we have to reassess, and something bad happens, we have to figure it out. And so that's what we're going to be talking about, is why we should be paying attention primarily in this first session. The second session is all about social media. It's our shortest session of the whole day. We're going to be talking about what we're up against. And then that third session is going to be basically the how. How do we protect our children? How do we go in and choose the settings and flip the switches and flip the bits and all the different things, and what do we need to use to help better protect our children? And that's what we're going to be talking about, okay? So, when we're going into this, remember what happened back in 1990-something or other, 1999? Remember we said this, don't get into strangers' cars, right? Don't meet people from the internet. If a white van pulls up with no windows, don't get in the van. Don't even talk to the people in the van, right? That's what we talk about. But then what happens in 2020? Well, in 2020, we literally summon strangers from the internet to get into their car. Think about how times have changed. It's kind of crazy when we think about that. Is we use apps like Uber and Lyft to literally summon strangers to get into their cars. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And so things have drastically changed. The temptations, though, have not. The temptations have not. I will tell you that things like pornography and narcissism and all these other things that we're seeing develop in our young people, they've been around for a very, very long time. Now you tell me, what's the difference? The difference is it's in their pocket this time. The difference is it's on speeds, internet speeds, that we could not have fathomed 15, 20 years ago. The internet we couldn't even fathom using in our pockets 25 years ago. And so we've come a very, very long way in a very short amount of time. I want to start off by saying that this is really a parenting issue first. This is really a parenting issue first. This is not going to be a class about parenting or grandparenting for that matter, but it's going to be a parenting issue first. Nothing is going to be a substitute for your good, godly parenting. Nothing at all. I will also say, in the other half of it, I guess, that this is also a technology issue. Because we can, at some points, blame this technology because it is being addictive. Tonight, in our PM worship service, I'm going to have a sermon about digital addiction, how to control and how to get freedom from digital addiction. And you may think that you're not addicted, but it's going to be a little spoiler alert. We're all addicted at some point. And it doesn't matter if we're 13 or if we're 30. We are all addicted to these screens in our hands. And so how do we break free, or how do we manage that? And how do we make sure that it works for us and not the other way around? So again, this is a parenting issue first. There will never be a substitute for your good and godly parenting. But also this is a technology issue. Albert Mohler said this. He said, the digital age is upon us. In the span of less than 3 decades, we have redefined the way that humans communicate, entertain, inform, research, create, and the last one, that's very important, connect. And what we know now is only a hint of what is to come. That quote both terrifies me and kind of inspires me at the same time. Because we have all these tools at our resources. We have all these tools at our fingertips. We have unlimited amounts of information and entertainment at our fingertips. What are we doing with it? If you've got a Bible on your phone, Psalm 127:1. This is a scripture I've used for a long time, and it has been very interesting to talk about when we talk about digital parenting. We talk about any parenting, for that matter. It's very closely related to what we're talking about. Psalm 127:1, very simply, it says this: unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord has a purpose in building every brick and taking part of every part of this house that we're building, then we're building in vain. This past summer, my dad, y'all know my dad. Some of you may know my dad. He's been a woodworker, a contractor, a handyman for half a century or more. He's been doing it for 40 or 50 years. He can do anything with a piece of wood that you want, okay? And you just know some people like that, or they're extremely good handymen, good at plumbing, good at electrical work, good at all these other different things, right? And that's a skill. I didn't get that skill. I didn't get that gene from my dad. I did get the technical gene of figuring out technical things. If it's got an Apple logo on it, I could probably fix it for you, right? But other than that, I didn't get that gene. I bought this little shelf. You know those little dinky Walmart shelves that you buy that are like $12 and they are held together with chicken wire and good intentions? You know what I'm talking about? I bought one of those things, and it was one of those little ones that had little cubes in it. It had about 40 little cubes in it, and they were going to use it for our preschool. And I thought, big man, I'll just go to Walmart and I'll pick me up one of those things and whip that up. That'll be great. And I spent 30 minutes or an hour putting that thing together, and when I got done, it was slanted. And I looked at the box, and I said, that's not the way that's supposed to look. And I did something wrong because I cut corners, because I didn't have the technical know-how to put together a silly little shelf. And I wasted that time. I wasted it because I didn't do it right the first time. We are wasting our time as parents and as grandparents and as guardians of our kids' digital lives if we do not think about how much these devices matter. If we just go and discount it and say, you know what, somebody else will teach my child that. My youth minister will handle that. The church will handle that. The school, that's the one we lean on most. The school will handle how my kids need to use technology. Now, I think that's what kind of this verse may be alluding to. Unless the Lord builds the house, unless God has a part in every single part, and that's the digital well-being part as well, then what does it say? We're building in vain. We're wasting our time. And so we need to understand that. The question that faces all of us, every one of us have lives online. Every one of our children have lives online. Do we know what they are doing? If you cannot say in the affirmative this evening that you know almost every single thing your child is doing on their device, almost every single thing that's happening on your home network at home, you can do that too. You don't have to be some IT whiz either. If you don't know everything that's going on, why don't you? Do you know what they're doing? Kids are connected like never before. When we think about where we've been, when we talk about, just the connection of all the connections that they have, the texting and the music and the movies and the photos and the Twitter and all the different stuff, right? When we think about all those different types of connections that we have, that those kids have, when we think about, I like to put the picture up here with this next picture right here with the telephone booth and America Online. Remember these things, y'all? When I was growing up, these things were like big, big deals, okay? You had to find pay phones. We stopped at a rest stop not too many months ago before all this virus stuff hit. We stopped at a rest stop on a trip not too many months ago, and there was a phone booth at a rest stop with like the phone part was ripped out of it, and there was just like these wires dangling. And I was just trying to be funny, and I stopped, and three of my boys who are all under 8 years old, I said, "Look, boys, it's a relic of an ancient age, right?" And the thing wasn't but 25 years old, right? And they've become completely obsolete with the technology that we have today. With America Online, you remember that. You remember getting the CDs in the mail. Remember the internet was a place that we had to go to. Remember that? Remember you had to sit down at a computer, maybe even not at your home. Maybe you didn't have internet at your home for a long time. Maybe you went to the library. It's just come a very long way in just 2 decades. And when we think about that, I put this next picture up here with the cat, because if we were to do something really interesting and say something interesting to some people about this device can literally access the wealth of all human knowledge. When we pull this up in this iPhone right here, I can literally access the wealth of all human knowledge. And somebody was to ask you, well, what do you use it for? Well, you would say, well, mostly I use it to look at like cat pictures, but whatever, and memes. I should probably just put a meme up there now, right? But when we think about that idea, we have devices that are no much bigger than our wallets, no thicker than anything that's so light, and they can just put them in our pockets. We have these devices in our hands that can literally access the wealth of all human knowledge. Have we thought about that? And we're giving our kids these things without passwords, and we're giving our kids these things sometimes without restrictions and without safeguards put on them. We need to be thinking about that. The first thing I think is when we think about parents need to realize, the first thing that we need to realize is we can never use the excuse that we didn't know. That's never going to be an excuse, okay? The next photo is a photo of a 1040 here. It's all getting towards tax time. I actually submitted my taxes yesterday to my attorney, or my tax guy, the Farm Bureau tax guy. And I was thinking about this. The last time I had something go wrong with my taxes was my very first year in ministry. And that was 2008. And my very first full-time year in full-time ministry in 2008, I hadn't filled out the appropriate paperwork. I had not done whatever it is I was supposed to do for that. And my tax guy, who's not my tax guy now, but my tax guy then, he says, "Hey, so you owe like $4,000. You're good with that, right? You've got that saved up, right?" And I was like, "I've been married for 6 months and I'm on my first job. What do you think?" I didn't have $4,000. I didn't have $400, much less $4,000, right? And my excuse to the IRS was what? Well, I didn't know. How sympathetic, Carrie, do you think the IRS was?
All right, don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's exactly what they said, right? Don't worry about it, just get it to us when you can, right? No. They said, well, we're happy to set up a payment plan for you. That's exactly what they said. They didn't give me any excuse. They didn't give me anything else. Now, that has long since gone, but I think about that all the time when we're talking about these devices, because I hear parents all the time. Well, I didn't know that could do that. Well, I didn't know TikTok did that. Well, I didn't know the message is deleted after a certain amount of... It doesn't matter if we didn't know or not. The knowledge is out there. This is the information age that we're living in. And there is absolutely no excuse for us as parents to not do the work, to be responsible parents, responsible digital parents to raise good digital citizens in this day and age. Our kids are living their lives on these devices. And we've got to be in there, everywhere, around them, surrounding them. The second thing is that your child, when we realize this, when we think about it, does not yet have the experience and willpower to keep themselves in check on the internet. And I know what you're thinking. There's grown men that don't know how to keep themselves in check on the internet. Why should we expect our 10-year-old or our 12-year-old to do the same thing, right? It's kind of the same argument that we have with driving cars and getting a driver's license. Y'all remember how that was, right? It's 16 here in this state. Some states it's 17, some states it's 18, some states it's different ages for that, but we don't trust somebody to drive a motor vehicle in the state of Alabama or the state of Tennessee until they're 16 years old. Why? Because they don't have the wherewithal to understand what that's all about. They don't understand the enormity of what they're doing. They don't have I don't know what word you would necessarily use for it, but they don't have the understanding of what's happening to them. And so when we think about this idea, the idea of them not being responsible enough, we have determined as a society that they're not responsible enough. And so why are we treating them with devices sometimes? Why aren't we giving our 6-year-olds some devices that can access the wealth of all human knowledge that don't have any restrictions set? We need to make sure that we do that. When we think about this, we need to be guides. We need to hold our children's hands just a little bit. We need to hold their hands. We do that in every other aspect of life, and with the technology, we actually need to do it. I look at people out here, Michael Rosenblum and Stacy, who I grew up with, who I know are around the same age as me. You too. I think about how we're in a unique spot because we grew up, didn't we, Michael, without this kind of technology. But we kind of got it when we were teenagers. We got the internet. I don't know about you, but I had the internet when I was about 17, 16 years old at my house. And it kind of started getting mainstream. And then in college, maybe it was really mainstream. And then you had, right after that, these iPhones come out. And nothing's ever been the same. And so we're part of this unique generation where we didn't have it growing up, and we have it now. And everybody else kind of fits outside. Everybody outside that age range, 30 to 40, I guess, fits outside of that. And what we have to understand is that we have to, somebody brought this up at a recent workshop I did. They said, I don't know if this generation of parents is going to get it, but I guarantee you the next generation will. And I thought that was very interesting because the next generation of parents is going to be the first generation that has had these things ever since they were kids, if you think about that. So when we talk about ourselves and talk about our families and talk about how we're raising our kids, we have to hold their hands a little bit. I want to just talk to you a little bit about some statistics, and I don't mean for these statistics to scare you or anything like that, but if we just kind of go through these a little bit. There were, January 2020, where there was 676 million so odd sites on the internet. That's sites, that's .coms, .nets, .orgs. There's billions and billions, maybe even trillions of pages, but we're just talking about sites, okay, registered sites. Now, if you look at those, and we can pick on pornography here, 68,140,000 of those were dedicated to pornography. That's a pretty good percentage, right? You might have heard at some point that the percentage was 6%. That's 6%. 6% of the entire internet is dedicated to pornography. That's not correct at all. It's more like 0.04%, which you're like, oh, well, the odds are certainly fine, right? This is not the number that we need to worry about. It's the next number that we need to be worried about. 1 in 5 searches made on a mobile device are for pornography. That's crazy. That's the number we need to be worried about. Because when we talk about these different things, when we talk about the fact of how much pornography and how much things that are on our kids' devices that we don't want them to see or need them to see or they don't need to see themselves, we may be very surprised at how many people are secretly struggling with that sin. In fact, I know we would be surprised. I'm constantly surprised, and I talk about it all the time. A few people that are very, very smart said a few interesting things. Let's go through these real quick. Adolescents who view pornography feel shame, diminished self-confidence, and sexual uncertainty. I don't think we need our children to be any more sexually uncertain in this sexually uncertain world, do we? The next quote, porn used by our youth is a greater threat to our national well-being than our economy. If you get connected with porn early in life, it alters your ability to relate. Think about that. It alters your ability to relate. A significant relationship exists between frequent pornography use and feelings of loneliness, including major depression in adolescence. Wow. You're talking about major depression in a 13 to 18-year-old young person. And then this last one, parents are the weak link in the chain when it comes to protecting their children. We are the breaking point most of the time. We are the weak link. We are the point at ground zero where it breaks. The average age of first exposure to internet pornography or nudity of any kind is 8 years old. 8. That average just 6 years ago was 11 years old. Why do you think the average has dropped so dramatically? Just access, that's all it is. And you've probably heard these stats before, so I'm probably not telling you anything that you don't know. 94% of children have seen nudity on their screens, most while doing homework. Why while doing homework? Somebody answer me that one. When do kids do homework? When do you want them to do homework? Let me rephrase the question. When do you want them to get their homework done? Right when they get home from school, right? And increasingly, they're submitting things online. Teachers are giving them things to watch. And you know what? They're kids. They get distracted. They click on the wrong thing. They browse the wrong website. They do something like that. And so the hours between 3 and 5 p.m., and believe it or not, the hours between 1 and 2 a.m. are actually the worst and most dangerous for a child to have a device. And when you say 3 to 5 p.m., well, if you have a parent that's at home, that's good. That's great. But most time parents, they work. They don't get home until 4:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30, and that's a dangerous time to have unsupervised internet access. 87% of sexual solicitations are made to youth in chat apps. And they don't have to have chat in the name necessarily to be a chat app. There's, of course, WeChat and Facebook Chat, or Facebook Messenger rather. There's Instagram private messaging. There's all sorts of these different, every service has its own kind of private messaging feature now. And as a parent, you need to have and know their username and their password. And you need to be able to log on your phone, on their app, and see their account and everything in it. And I have parents from time to time come up to me and ask me about, well, what about, and y'all might get a kick out of this, I don't know. They say, what about my child's privacy? I love your face, by the way. Her face was like, see, my answer is that they get privacy when they go to the bathroom. That's it. Everything else, that is my phone. You're under my house. This is my phone and I'm letting you use it. Aren't I the greatest? Right? When we think about how we structure this, when we think about it from a different perspective, it changes how we think about it a little bit. In the next place here, this one's interesting. 67% admit to clearing their browser history or search history in order to hide internet usage from their parents. That's almost 7 out of 10 kids who admitted that they wanted to hide. And it may have been nothing nefarious. It may have not been porn. It may have not been something that they just didn't want you to see. But they're trying to hide stuff from you because they're kids. And again, I'm going to bring that out many, many times. We have to do the hard work because they are kids and they are going. Think about when you were 16, 17 years old. Did you ever make a good decision when you were 17 years old? I love when it starts talking about the story of Joseph in I believe it's Genesis 37. It says, and Joseph being 17 years old. They put that in there for a reason because nobody ever makes good decisions when they're 17 years old. And so we have to help our kids make great decisions, okay? We have to give them everything that we can to help them make good decisions. In the third place tonight, or this afternoon, and we're looking at this, privacy is an illusion. And I could go on this for all day long, but we won't spend that much time on it. Privacy is an illusion. And the thing about privacy is that it does not exist in the electronic world. There is no such thing as privacy. Any of you who have worked in government contracting, government technology work of any type, you will understand this. Anybody who has worked for a computer company at all or knows anything about it will know that there is no such thing as privacy. These were headlines from the week of January 27th, 2019, about a year and a half ago or so. And this was all just in the same week. Facebook was paying kids, we're talking kids ages 13 to 18, they were paying kids to install a virtual private network that spied on them in turn. They were giving them $20 in Facebook credits every month. Facebook was paying kids $20 a month. Apple had a FaceTime bug that lets you eavesdrop on others. It would be this thing where you called somebody and they hung up real quick and you could hear the other part of the conversation. I mean, this is just a sampling of things that you've heard. When we think that something is private and something is encrypted and something is going to be extremely one-to-one online, we're lying to ourselves. And we need to make sure that, and again, we know that as adults, but it's getting that idea across to our children. Nothing is private. Hebrews 4:13, very quickly. Hebrews 4:13. You know, I think about, every time I read this passage, I thought about the idea of privacy and the idea of what happens in the era of there's no privacy right now. Verse 13, and no creature, talking about God, and no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. Now, you might, if you were skilled, be able to hide things that you've done on your devices. Kids, if they're smart, which they are, and we don't ever need to underestimate them, they may be able to hide things on their devices from their school, from your place of work, from your other co-workers, from your spouse even if you're married, from all sorts of different entities, from your church, from the government. You can't hide anything from the government. We like to think we can, but you can't. And even if you could hide from all of those different things, even if you had a solution for all of those different things, guess what and guess who you couldn't hide from? And that's God. And we need to be teaching our kids that first and foremost, the things that we type with our thumbs on these tiny little screens, we're first accountable to God. We're not accountable to the government. We're not accountable to each other or anything like that. We're going to be first held accountable to God. And so that's one of the things that we need to understand. When I talk about privacy, I use the illustration of a bucket of feathers. If you take a bucket of feathers out on a windy day like today, what's going to happen? Well, feathers don't weigh anything. They don't weigh anything and they're going to go everywhere. What's the odds of you getting every single feather back in that bucket on a windy day? Near zero. And it's the same with putting something out there on the web. It doesn't matter where it is, whether it's in a private message or a Snapchat that is deleted after 10 seconds, it does not matter. Once it is out there, it is out there. I got a friend in Mobile who kind of coined the phrase that I use a lot, and he says everything that you put online, every single bit of text, every single image that you like, that you share, that you retweet, everything that you do, everything you put out there, it's both public and permanent. It is as public as if we were shouting it on the town square, and it's as permanent as if you put it in stone for everybody to read for centuries from now. We need to understand that, and that is the idea that we need to convey to our kids. We've seen it, and our kids are beginning to see it, I think. I've seen some kids that are answering very, very much differently now than they were 5 years ago. And they're seeing all these people, these celebrities that have gotten in trouble for different things, and they're saying, yeah, I want to go to the college that I want to go to. So I'm going to be really, really good online. I'm going to be really good in what I do and what I say and where I go and who takes my picture and all those other different things. Kids are getting more savvy as it is anyway. So the last thing I want to say in this first session here is that technology is amazing. We need to make sure that we need to teach our children to use it responsibly. And we're going to build on this throughout the rest of the day. But before we end this session, I've got 10 things. And again, all of these slides are available at my website. 10 things that you can do at home tonight. Okay, when you get home from church tonight, these are 10 things that you can do, and we'll go through these very quickly. Number 1, you can make a list of devices in your home that access the internet. Okay? 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that wasn't a big deal, was it? But now, it seems like it's everywhere. You get a pad like Carrie has over here, just a regular old standard legal pad. I know pen and paper, that's crazy these days, right? But we can actually do it. Just get a pen and paper, put one line down the middle of that pad, and on the left side, on that left column, you put what devices you have that are access to the internet. And then on the right side, you put when and if, or what if, restrictions or parental controls you have set on those things. And I think you'll be surprised. One, I think you'll be surprised at how many devices you have, because I do this every 6 months for myself, and I always find a device that I forgot about. I'll be, that's interesting. But then second, you'll be surprised at how the lack of parental controls that you have set, but also the lack of parental controls or how bad they are on some of these devices like smart TVs. And that is going to be one of the number one things that you need to search for when you're buying a new piece of technology for your home. If you're buying a new TV, hey, what are the parental controls like? If you're buying a new box for your TV, if you're buying something else, an internet-connected device, hey, what are the parental controls for this? That needs to be one of the first questions you ask, especially if you have children in the house. So again, make a list of devices in your home. That'll give you a strategy, kind of a plan moving forward. Well, as we talk about some of the other things today. Number 2 is nearly impossible, but you have to try at least when they're at home. Have the child's device always in your sight. Back when people like Stacy and Michael and I were growing up, it was what? We didn't have Walkmans, didn't have TVs. I've never heard Walkmans, but I'm going to use that one next. You weren't allowed to have Walkmans, or weren't allowed to have our own televisions in our rooms, right? And I couldn't argue that with my mom, because like, Mom, what am I going to watch at 11 p.m.? What 4 channels, we had, right? What am I going to watch? And so when we think about that, that has replaced that. We need to make sure that our kids don't have their Chromebooks and their iPads in their rooms, especially if they're below a certain age. If we're talking below 13 here, even more important when it gets to that age, because they get wiser, they get more curious, but that's another discussion. You need to make sure that your kids do not take their devices to their room. And then the next one, that third one, take up all devices at bedtime. Let me tell you, from experience, if you institute this one at home, you're not going to have any problems. There'll be no fretting. There'll be no people, nobody gets mad. They just hand it over to you voluntarily and everything is great. That's not correct at all, because it is going to be a battle, especially on this one. And the constant arguments from kids are what? Like, I need to listen to music to go to sleep, right? Well, we used to have these things called compact discs back in the day. And you can listen to those all you want, right? Oh, I need to watch YouTube videos to go to sleep. No, you don't. No, you don't. I need it as an alarm. No, you need to buy an alarm clock. Those are $9 at Walmart, and you can pick one up today. You can't get any toilet paper at Walmart, but you can get alarm clocks at Walmart, okay? When we can rationalize all sorts of things as parents. Well, I'll just let them have their phone for that. When we could easily help something that we don't want to happen, like the mother at Graymere that told me a story about how She showed up at her, let me get this correct. She showed up at her neighbors down the street. Her daughter was dating their son. 2 a.m. in the morning in the pouring rain, and basically said, "Why is your son sending photos to my daughter like this?" It happened. Your kids don't need their devices in their bedrooms during the night. Period. Now, as they get older, as they get to 14, 15, 16 years old, then you need as a parent to start working on those different things, and maybe you allow them to have more liberties. But again, young children, 13 and below, not a question in my mind. The fourth one right there, look for previous evidence. That's very unpleasant. Because if we have a reason to look for previous evidence or look for evidence of wrongdoing, then odds are you've had trouble in the past with your child. And I've heard from so many parents over the course of the last 5 to 6 years doing this workshop where they have gone and done some of these things that we are talking about this afternoon, and they have come to big realizations about what their child is doing on these devices. You might find some stuff that you don't want to find. And again, I'm not saying that any of your children are not good kids. In fact, I know your children are good kids because you're here and you're members of the church and that you're faithful and that you try to teach your kids how to be faithful in every single walk of life. I understand that. But I'm really not worried about your kids. I'm worried about the other people's kids, the other people that don't have a faith that they lean on, that they don't have God and Jesus in their life, that they don't have a support system like the church. That's the ones I'm worried about. I'm worried about those kids influencing yours. So it's just as important to make sure that you have those safeguards set up against the other kids and not just your own as well. Beware of suspicious apps is that next one. Make sure that we're going to have a couple, especially in the end of the next session, we're going to have a couple of very suspicious apps that you should not have whatsoever. As a parent, I'm going to let you decide and you be the judge of Snapchat and TikTok and other things that are like that. If you allow your children to have those, then by all means, make sure that you manage it. But at the same time, there are some apps that I'm going to talk to you about that you need to know that are just non-negotiables. They should absolutely not be used. Your kids should not be using them at any age. We shouldn't use them as adults either. And so again, beware of those suspicious apps. You should be taking your child's phone, device, iPad, whatever it is, and you should have physical access to it. And you should be able to get on it, and you should be able to put the PIN code in. You should know all the things. You should be able to scroll and look at different things, look at text messages, and you should be asking hard questions. Hey, why do you have 3 calculator apps on here? You're not like a math whiz. What's up with that? You need to be asking the hard questions. So if you see something suspicious on your child's phone, ask them about it. And sometimes if you've got good parental controls set up, they won't even get to that point because they'll have to ask you for every single app they download, okay? That last one I think is very important that we kind of glaze over sometimes. And I talk to kids and I talk to parents and I say the same thing. Live your life on your devices no differently than we would than in real life. Because somehow along the way, kids got the idea that stuff that we're typing out with our thumbs and things that we're doing online doesn't necessarily translate into the real world, but it does. And there are real consequences for what things we do on these screens. There are real consequences for the things that you share and you post and you like and you retweet and all these other different things. And we need to help them understand that. That's the end of our first session. Any questions, comments? Next session will be a little bit more discussion, and then the last session that we'll have will be a lot of discussion. Okay? Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Got a question.
Of course, Tim has the first question, of course.
How old were you when you first realized the danger of internet access?
I was 14, maybe 15. We had an IBM Aptiva computer that had a 1 gigabyte hard drive on it. No joke. Why would you ever need more than 1 gigabyte? I don't know. And so 1 gigabyte hard drive on it. And one day I got a spam email and I clicked on it. And it showed me something that I should not have seen. And that was the moment I realized there's a much bigger world out there that I'm not aware of. And so we don't necessarily want our children to have that kind of experience. They need to know that, but they don't need to have that kind of experience. Does that make sense? We need to be protecting them from everything at all times, as much as we possibly can. Good question. Follow up?
Next one has 2 parts.
Oh, a two-part follow-up question. Here we go.
Part number 1, how much control did you want your parents to have over your social media, internet access, and such viewing when you were in their care?
So to answer that, now I will say, now the question, let me restate the question for the online audience. How much control did I want my parents to have over my social media, my internet usage when I was that age? Okay? There was something called AOL Instant Messenger back in that day, and that was as easy as it got. It was one-to-one, you talking with the actual person. You could talk with strangers, that was highly inadvisable, but you could talk to strangers, right? But there was a girl that I was head over heels with in high school that I would talk to on Instant Messenger every day on the dot, 3:45. Okay? I would have probably died if my parents would have saw that transcript. There wasn't anything bad in it necessarily. It was just one of those kind of private things, like I don't want anybody to know. It's just between me and her, right? And we got all that kind of stuff. How many of y'all would want the world to read text messages between you and your wife? Even not being inappropriate, you just wouldn't want that, right? And it's kind of the same thing. And so I don't know if I would say necessarily social media because it kind of didn't exist back then yet. But that was as close as it got. And you're right, I did not want them to have access to look at that. First of all, they didn't know how. And my parents didn't know thinking back now, Tim, you've refreshed my memory, my parents didn't even know my password to my own AOL account, which was bananas. They should have been able to log in and see everything that I did. And hopefully I didn't do anything wrong, but at the same time, it was like, that's crazy. And that's kind of the same attitude that some of us parents have with these devices is that and again, we get to that argument where we say, well, I know I've got good kids. I know you've got good kids. But I think that is a little bit of the devil whispering in our ear. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I think he kind of tells us that sometimes. Don't worry about your kids. I'll take care of them. You got good kids. You've taught your kids very well. Don't worry. And that's what we can't do. That's what we can't do at all. Your second part.
So part 2 of that
Okay.
is, although you did not want your parents having access of any kind to what you were doing, you are now, pardon the quote, advocating a parent-police state for your own kids.
You're absolutely right. Now, I went into the military right after high school. And I remember when we all got email accounts. And I remember when we each had our own desktop computers. And you better believe you were not allowed to do anything on those computers. Now, YouTube and Facebook and stuff like that hadn't come about because that happened right after I got out of the military, actually, in like 2004, 2005. But that was kind of the same thing. When I was 18 to 22, using all that stuff, every communication was monitored. Everything was done. If I'd have been looking at something inappropriate on that computer, there'd have been guys coming from QA to say, hey, you shut down your computer, you come with us, kind of thing, seriously. And so that was kind of my indoctrination into having that security. And then I went straight from there to a place like Freed-Hardeman, where they had it pretty locked down. And they probably still do, but they had it pretty locked down. In fact, we couldn't look at, I don't know when y'all were there, if any of y'all were there, but we couldn't look at YouTube for the longest time. YouTube was just out. So when I got out of the military or got out of college in 2008 and started looking at YouTube, I was like, man, YouTube is fantastic, y'all. And everybody's like, yeah, we've known that for a while. So that was very interesting. So I had about 7 years there almost of good training, like, well, don't go there because it doesn't matter. I can't go there, right? Even stuff that wasn't necessarily nefarious. So yeah, that's a good, that has, in all the digital parenting things, that has never been asked. Has never been asked. Very good. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Just curious, did your parents know your password or know a password
I
was
don't,
needed for that?
I don't think they did. They did know it was needed because my mom would check her email every night, you know, and she'd get on the computer. You remember when we had to sign on to it? So I would hear her on the phone, and nobody could use the phone either. Remember that? It's like, don't get on the phone, I'm checking my email, right? And that's what she would do every night. So she knew the procedure. It was just not one of those things that you thought about. And it was just such in its infancy at that moment that my parents just didn't think about it.
What I call the assumption of innocence.
That's exactly right. We can never assume innocence. We always have to be, and the term I like to use is vigilant. We don't need to be not trusting of our kids. We don't need to berate them. We don't need to put them, make them live at Walden Pond or anything like that. We don't need to make them do that in the middle of the wilderness. But we do need to make sure that we're vigilant in protecting them. And we need to make sure, and sometimes parents need the reminder that we're not our children's friends. We're not our children's friends. We're their protectors. We're the ones responsible for their upbringing. That's hard to say sometimes, even harder to live out, as I have 3 little boys who I know are going to do everything in their power to test every single will I have. I know it right now. Any other questions, comments? Okay, let's take a very brief break. I have 2:46. We are hurting for minutes here, so let's take a 4-minute break and be back at 10 till, and we'll start our next session, okay? Thank y'all very much.
Anyone wants any snacks or anything like that? Back in the fellowship hall, there are some individually wrapped, fruits, snacks for y'all.
stupid enough to do their military email. Never mind, people are definitely stupid enough to use their military email. You know, it was just like without even skipping a beat. And so it was a.
No, what are you doing?
It was like we knew it was one of those things where it was like MPs and stuff. But it was interesting because since we were there, so it's integrated, so half Marines, half sailors, master arms, MPs, whatever, and so we're in this unit together. So like, they're not the blue side like do the cases and stuff like that. They're like actual whole security, big weapons, the out control boats and stuff kind of thing. But it was still like we're gonna need extra hands here kind of thing on base, and so it was a whole thing. I was like,
When Leah was in school, she used to tell me, I'm the only kid in my class that doesn't have a cell phone.
she probably was listening right now.
Oh, yeah, it's still on.
Yeah, she said she's on.
I'm the only kid in my class that has a cell phone. I said, well, too bad. She told me, I don't know, a month ago, no, it's been longer than that, sometime this last year. She said, Clara came to her, who is, fourth grade? Said she's the only kid in her school who doesn't have a cell phone. And Leah said, too bad.
Goes around, comes around. I don't want my kid to be the last one at his school to have one, but I don't want to be the second last one. That's for sure.
And the first phone I had, that was not like, oh no, I hit the internet button. Let me go back. Don't get charged for internet. 10 cents a megabyte or whatever. Yeah, I had texting, but it was like 200 messages a month. Like 200 messages a month. That's what you get. And
I'm up there working away.
And then, but I to the military. Yeah, I know. I had somebody. This was when I was in high school. It's like, text messages. There's now everybody has a limited text messages, but she's like, I do these tons of text messages. And I was like, I don't think I was awake for that many minutes.
That's crazy. All right. Let's go back ahead and get started.
All right, we're upstairs and I'll give you the go-ahead.
Okay.
We got.
I'm trying to remember to retake those questions for the online audience too. We'll probably mix it up a little bit. It's probably not really here now. Maybe on the computer should be one. Thank y'all for streaming this too. I know that. Woo, there we go. I know that one. So we got the thumbs up. All right. And again, if you're joining us online, that's very 1999. Thank you for joining us. This is our second session of our digital parenting workshop here at Maysville. And again, thank you so much for having me back. It's always good to come back home, and it's great to be here. When we talk, this one will be a little bit more discussion. I'm going to get a few input items from you here in just a second. Before we kind of go into it, we're going to talk about the prospect of social media, what it is, what we're kind of really up against. And I would consider a lot of things social media. I would consider YouTube to a certain point social media. I would consider TikTok, obviously, social media. Even Snapchat, which is more messages sent to, between people, and maybe even between groups of people. I would consider that very much social media. I'll talk to you a little bit at the end here about some anti-social apps that we're going to discuss. But before we get into all that, I don't know if y'all have ever met Jacob. Jacob is the one there on the right with his hands on that is a 150-gallon stock tank from Farmer's Supply. Best swimming pool for little boys that you've ever seen. Okay. My wife said, we should buy a swimming pool. I said, or we can just buy a stock tank and call it a day. And she said, that's brilliant. So it worked out. And so Jacob, they love swimming. Of course, the little David with the goggles on his head, he had to photobomb, and I couldn't get him out of the picture, so he's going to be there anyway. But Jacob, whom y'all may or may not have met, is 8 years old. He is in school in a second grade class, in a regular classroom at school. He loves lots of different things. He loves his DVDs. He loves music. He loves writing, actually. He loves reading. Not too fond of math. He's kind of like his dad there. He's not fond of math, so that's kind of the same thing. And by all accounts, he is just a normal 8-year-old little boy. Except he's not. When he was about 1.5 or 2 years old, my wife and I got that feeling that something just wasn't right. You know what I mean, parents? You know when your child is sick, or when they're struggling with something, or they won't tell you what's wrong or something, you just know something's wrong, you just know something's not right. That's what we felt like with Jacob, and he couldn't even really talk all that much yet. We just got this feeling that something wasn't right, and we took him up to Vanderbilt Children's, and it was like that. And they had diagnosed him as being on the autism spectrum. And it was at that point, this was 6.5 years ago, and I still think about it. But that day, it was just devastating to my wife and I. First it was a shock, and then it was just sadness for her, but the typical male reaction for me, anger. Why can't I fix this? I'm a fixer. I'm a man. I need to fix things, right? And I can't fix it. And they told us over and over again, this isn't your fault. This isn't your fault. I said, there has to be a cause. There's not. Well, there has to be a way to fix it. Well, there's not. It was difficult. It was probably, I would say, in all the different things I've been into in Afghanistan and Iraq and the military and all the difficult days that I've had, there was none more difficult than that day. And since then, doctors and nurses and psychologists and behavioral specialists and all the different people that work with Jacob and then continue to work with Jacob have told us one thing repeatedly. And they said it was because you were proactive. You were proactive, not reactive. You were proactive in getting him the help that he needed. There's even a term for it in autism circles called early intervention. The earlier you can intervene in something like that, the better a child is going to be moving forward. And they told us over and over again, 1, it wasn't our fault. 2, you did the right thing because this early intervention. And so I think about that a lot, and the idea of being proactive and not reactive. You know, there was nothing that my wife could have done or didn't do, nothing she could have ingested or been exposed to or anything like that that caused Jacob's autism. And sometimes when we talk about digital parenting, there's going to be nothing that you can do. You can set up all sorts of restrictions and fences, and you can keep them on certain websites, and you can do all these other different things. Sometimes there's going to be nothing that you can do to keep your kids from getting out of trouble, and that's just a fact of life. We know that. If you've ever raised children or are raising children, you know that already. But again, the idea of being proactive, if we don't take the idea of being proactive into our digital parenting, having a plan, a strategy for digital parenting, having a set of rules for the devices. If we don't have a strategic plan in place, if you're not proactive, then you're going to be reactive. And if you're reactive, you're already behind the 8 ball. There is a download on my website. If you go there, again, all these slides are on my website, recently updated. But if you go to my website, there is something that a woman drafted up called a parent-child device contract. And this was written by a woman who was featured on ABC News a few years ago that was giving her 14-year-old an iPhone for the first time. And she wrote this 18-point kind of contract, and it is not dry at all. In fact, it's very entertaining reading. And if you go on there and you download this and you look at it, it's just a PDF. She's got several of these practical rules about, hey, here's how you use your device. Don't use it when somebody's talking to you. Don't use it when you're at the dinner table. All practical things. And then say, don't use it don't use it to look at this, and don't use it to look at that. And if you do that, I'm going to take your phone, then we're going to talk about it, and there's going to be lots of weeping and gnashing of teeth, okay? And she talks about all these different things. You should definitely take a look at that and adapt it to your family. So if you have little kids, now is the time to start. If you have big kids, it's not too late. I hear from parents who have 16, 17, 18-year-olds all the time who say, well, it's probably too late for me to start. No, not at all. It is never too late to start these things for us, okay? So when we think about that, we need to be proactive. Let's go to James chapter 3. James chapter 3. And so much of what we say is social media, if you think about it. And so much of social media is what we say, okay? It's the thing, I know that the coronavirus is very serious. I really do. But the jokes are just outstanding online. I mean, I'm telling y'all, I've never seen funnier jokes. I know that some people are suffering, especially those in China and Italy, and I hope it doesn't get to that point here. It probably will. But at this point, people are still joking about it, and it's pretty funny. But when we think about all that, when we think about how people communicate, how do we communicate primarily today? It's over our devices. We can Skype or do a Zoom recording or video with somebody across the world and not have to fly there and meet face to face. We can meet with them right there. Our technology is simply amazing. James chapter 3, this is what James says very quickly about what we say. Okay? Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. Verse 2, for we all stumble in many ways. There's a whole sermon right there in that verse. And if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, also able to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. They are so large and are driven by strong winds. They are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. I think I have a picture of an aircraft carrier here. This is on the screen here is a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. It's 1,092 feet long. It's 400 feet wide. It displaces over 100,000 tons of water. There are 3,092 officers and crew on board. It can carry up to 180 various aircraft. It has a plutonium new reactor core for power, and it only has to refuel that plutonium once every 20 years. It is an amazing piece of work, piece of technology. I've been able to be on 2 of them very, very briefly in my time in the Marine Corps. And when you're standing on one of these things, if you've ever been on a boat this size or a cruise ship this size, right? It's like you're not even on a ship. You're just on land, right? They're so enormous. Now, when you think about something so enormous, we're saying 1,092 feet long, 400 feet wide. How big do you think the rudder is on one of those ships? Well, you guys say, it's enormous, right? It's smaller, probably not even half the size of this very auditorium. They have 2 rudders on these ships that are both 30 feet by 20 feet. And that's it. And that makes the point here in James is that something so big, our tongues, our mouths, what we say, something so big has such a big responsibility. Our bodies are so big, yet they're driven by one thing, with our tongues. These ships are so big, yet they're driven by a very small rudder. Now that's a big, big rudder, right? But when we think about the size of the ship relative to that, it's still very small. And so when you think about that idea, what are we saying? What are our children saying? Verse 7 of chapter 3. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who were made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does that sound like social media these days? You might see somebody sitting in a worship service and 30 minutes later they're saying or doing something online that you would never condone or shouldn't condone. Why do we curse people and then go sing songs of praise to our Lord in worship services? It's kind of this it's a hypocritical thing, isn't it? And sometimes we do it. Oftentimes we do it. And so when we think about it, let's go to the next slide. sometimes when we think about it, we have to think about the dangers of what's happening here, and we have to think about, remember when I said in the last session that sometimes the technology is to blame? Well, it very much is. And we can't talk about social media, we can't talk about what we say and how we are influenced by what we say unless we talk about Dr. B.J. Fogg. He's the creator of the Persuasive Technology Lab at Stanford University. The Persuasive Technology Lab has been around since 2005. It was started in the heyday of the creation of Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. It's at Stanford University, which is right around the corner from all of these places. Dr. Fogg is not an evil person. He's not our enemy. He's not anything like that, so don't think of him like that. He just is a person that was on the very, very cutting edge of what we know now as social media. And he has gone on to have students in his class that have influenced students now, 19, 20-year-old students that have wrote Facebook apps that have influenced the attitudes and done all sorts of things with people's data to tens of millions of people's data on Facebook. He had 2 co-founders of Instagram in his class. This man knows what he's talking about. You're not going to see him on YouTube necessarily. You're not going to see him do a TED Talk. But he is the father of modern social media. And that phrase down there is the kind of motto, so to speak. It's maybe an unspoken, unpublicized motto of the Persuasive Technology Lab, and that is, we design machines to change humans. Now notice I didn't leave out human behavior. That would make more sense, right, as a sentence? But no, it's we design machines to change humans. They don't want to stop at our behavior. They want to change everything about us. What we think, how we react, what angers us, who we vote for. Did you know that? The number one thing that incites you online, the number one thing that gets you to share or like or post or retweet or whatever it is, the number one thing is anger. We will do something out of anger before we will do anything else. And that is when, as parents and as grandparents and as guardians and as examples to our kids, we need to be holding back. Let's go to the next slide, please. Social media, I will say, and again, it's a great tool, but social media does not have your child's best interests at heart. It does not have your best interests at heart. It does not have your family's best interests at heart. They are a company in business to make money. Now, we don't pay for Facebook, we don't pay for Gmail, we don't pay for Instagram and things like that, but how do we pay for it? Can somebody tell me the answer? Advertisements are data. They get our data from advertisements to sell to advertisers. It's just this one circle. We know that as adults. We know that. We may not know the extent of that, but we know that. And that leads us to the next thing here up on the screen. It says, you are the product, not the customer. Now, if you step down here into Kroger, we're in Alabama, so I have to say what? Step into Piggly Wiggly, okay? If you step down into Piggly Wiggly, you are what? You are Piggly Wiggly's customer, I would hope, right? You're not the product. The product is on the shelves, and you're buying the product, right? But when we're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, anything that we have not paid for with money, we're the product. And we get kids to understand that perspective, and suddenly we become a lot more discerning. That's a church word. We become a lot more discerning in what we post and what we say is exactly what we're talking about here with social media. Let's go to the next slide. Nothing, again, I won't beat this to death or anything, but nothing is private. Nothing is private. And you need to make sure that our kids understand that. One, we're the product, not the customer. We're not Facebook's customer. They don't have their best interests at heart. And two, that nothing that you do on any of these social networks is private. Kids think, and it's not kids being dumb, they're very, very smart. Incredibly smart, aren't they? They're just naive. They don't think that they don't think that these things can come back and be used against you. Things that they say and post and like and all these other different things. So again, we have to help them understand that. Let's keep going here. You need to know your child's username and account to all username and password rather to all accounts. Now, I know that seems like one of those duh statements, like, oh, duh, Chad, well, you need to know that. We're not your parents from 1998, right? We need to know that. You need to know all the accounts. And in fact, in the document that I referenced before, the woman who put together the 18 kind of rules and regulations, she said that she limited her 14-year-old to just 5 accounts. That might be a good place to start for you. Maybe even start when they're 8, 10, 12 years old. Maybe even start them at just 1. Maybe even have them on your account so that you can watch everything that they're doing. Whatever your strategy is, just have a strategy, because you wouldn't believe how many parents just have no strategy for digital well-being whatsoever. So again, know their username, account, and passwords for all accounts. Grab their phone. Have physical access to their phone. Look at their phone, what's on their phone. You need to make sure that you know everything that's on there. Your child, and this is an idea that we don't think about either, okay? But your child will naturally gravitate towards what is popular with their friends and what you're not using, okay? It's question quiz time here for you. How many of you think, how many of you think that the 13 to 18-year-olds that you know or that are your children are on Facebook? Raise your hand. Okay? Now, I'll go ahead and tell you, you're probably all wrong. Because you think, oh, kids aren't on Facebook, right? Kids are not on Facebook. They're not on Facebook. You're right. They're not on Facebook. They're not interacting. They're not posting and liking and commenting and retweeting. Because guess what? Who is Facebook for? Old fogies. Couldn't have said it better, Chad. Old fogies, right? What's the average age demographic? The biggest age demographic on Facebook? Somebody tell me. 52? Not quite that high. Anybody know the age range?
30 to 40.
25 to 40.
You're getting right around there. It's 35 to 45. Okay, 5 years ago it was what? 30 to 40. It's just, we just keep matriculating that ball right up the field, you know what I mean? And so we are the ones on Facebook. Guess who's watching us? Our children. It's not hard to figure out, is it? The data is showing us that all of our teenagers are still very much on Facebook. They still check it every other day. They just don't communicate on it. They don't use it. They may even use Facebook Messenger for things, but they will not communicate in public. Because why? That's the old folks network. That's what it is. But they're seeing everything that we're doing. I asked, and this is where we get a little bit to the fun part. I know I stepped all over your toes on the last session, but this session will have just a tiny bit of fun. This is where we get to the fun part. These were quotes that I actually got from kids at Graymere about 2 years ago. I did a class with them about social networks and things like that and asked them what they honestly thought. I told them I was not going to use their name, and so they were very free in giving me their comments, okay? So, the first one right here said, that's where my dad goes to complain about stuff. Okay? Now, we laugh. You laugh, Ryan. But how true is that? Right? And this guy's kid, or this kid's dad, rather, he was that guy, right? He was that guy that got on Facebook and was complaining about everything from the government to the president to the church to the politics to the county commission not, giving out hot dogs at the carnival, whatever, right? He was complaining about everything. And that's how it is. We're being live streamed. I know I'm probably being watched right now. I can say what I want though. But when you think about it, that was his entire idea. That was where it was instant. That was where he first went. It's not where I go to connect with my peers. It's not where I go to see my mom post borderline inappropriate things sometimes, right? It's not where I go. It's where my dad goes to complain about stuff. That should kind of tell us something, shouldn't it? Let's go to the next one. It's where my mom tags me in photos that I don't want anybody to see. Okay? My wife, and if my wife is watching, I'm going to pay for this later, but whatever. My wife and her mother are the most photo-centric junkies I have ever seen in my life. They will never miss a photo opportunity for anything. And these phones these days have been invented for them, okay? They document, our children are the most documented people on the planet, okay? And so when I come in from work, and this has happened more than once, I've come in from work and she's on the phone with her mom, almost yelling at her mom saying, "Mom, you've got to take that photo off. That's completely inappropriate. That was like 25 years ago. Her mom will get on these wild tears and she'll just scan all these photos and just throw them up on Facebook. That's where they get this idea. And so this idea of putting our entire lives online is very social, right? You come over to somebody's house, and if they're photomaniacs like my mother-in-law and my wife, then they're going to have back in the old days, they would have a photo album. What do you do now? Oh, let's pull out our phones and look at our last few photos. Oh, look at this, check that out. Oh, let me send it to you, right? That's how we live now. And so again, it's not just about what we say, it's what we're saying also with our posts, with our pictures, and all those different things. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one. There we go. It's mainly for old people, like my mom and my dad, and my grandpa writes on it in all caps. Now, why? Somebody tell me why. Why do older people write on Facebook, or anything for that matter, in all caps? Why? So they can see it. That's all it is. But what is all caps vernacular for on the web? Shouting, right? And so every time, I told you before, my kids are the most documented kids on Facebook. And so every time my wife posts a group of pictures, we'll always have those comments kind of roll in. And then there's that old lady at church. "Oh, lovely kids, thank you for sharing." I mean, it's just all caps and everything. It's so funny. And again, this was one of the first things that these kids says. And this is to show you kind of the disconnect a little bit with maybe what we think of, because for some older people, and this is not a lie, for some older people, Facebook is the internet for them. I can't tell you how many iPads I've set up for older members of our congregation at Graymere. And the first thing and only thing that they want is the Facebook app. Well, that's where I get all my news. That's where I get all my stuff. That's where I get everything. And that's kind of scary and kind of terrifying, right? And then we would think as like maybe 30 and 40-year-olds would think, "Oh, well, that's kind of silly." But where did you learn about coronavirus stuff, right? Where did you learn about some of those different things, right? CNN, Fox News, hopefully. But I bet you Facebook was in there too. So again, we might be the old people here. We might, okay? Let's go to the next one. We're going to talk about Twitter for a second. Now, Twitter is completely different than Facebook, in my opinion. And a lot of young people are not on Twitter, and I don't bring that up for Twitter, but if you place any app, TikTok is the big one right now. If you place any app in place of Twitter in these things, it makes perfect sense. And some of the things that they say right here are scary. So let's go to the first one here. Twitter, it's the social network my parents don't know how to use. Now, I'm not talking about Twitter necessarily. I'm talking about TikTok and Snapchat, maybe even things like YouTube, Instagram. Oh, that's the social network my parents don't know how to use. Do you hear the subtext in that? Can you read between the lines there? What does that mean?
Probably the one I'm using.
I'm going to be there because my parents are not going to be there. That's the reason why I don't click and like and comment and interact on Facebook, because my parents are there. When did you ever, when you were a teenager, when did you ever want to hang out with your parents? I remember, y'all remember Food Value out there on Winchester Road? Y'all go out there? That is where I spent most of my nights, in the parking lot. You know why? Because my parents weren't there. And that's silly, is that you look at that as an adult and go, what in the world was I thinking, right? But it's the same kind of, you see where I'm going with this? It's the same kind of thing kids have taken kids these days, I can say that because I'm like almost 40 now, kids these days have taken this idea of hanging out to a completely virtual place, to a completely digital world. And they're only going to hang out at the cool spots. They're not going to hang out where the old people hang out. We need to be thinking about that. Let's go to the next one. It's basically the Wild West of the internet. Pretty much anything goes. They were talking about Twitter at this point, but I've heard kids say the same thing about Snapchat and TikTok. My parents don't know how to use it. Anything goes, so I'm there. Yes, sir.
You know, President Trump uses with Twitter all the time, so he may have put it more in vogue now for the older folks.
May have. And some people don't even, when I ask people primarily over the age of 50, do you know what Twitter is? They'll raise their hand and I go, okay, do you know how to use it? And then all the hands will go down, right? That's just how it is. Twitter's actually a lot simpler than Facebook ever was. And it's just simply to get your information and your pictures and your videos out there. That's it. But Facebook has just migrated into this whole huge conglomeration of stuff that, y'all have any idea how many people are on Facebook? 2.2 billion with a B. I remember when they celebrated 100 million. They had it all over the homepage of their website. It's crazy. These things have come and to become social media, and again, what we say, talking about what James says, what we say, our tongues are fires, our tongues do a lot of damage if we don't watch it. Again, going back to that, so much of what we say is on these things, and this is where our kids are hanging out. And the things that they're saying and doing and repeating and sending to others, we might not want them to be involved in. Let's go to the next one. Twitter is where my parents, and this one's so prevalent today, it's where my parents can't keep up with me. What do you think about that? What does that say to you? If you're a parent, doesn't matter what age, what does that say to you when a kid says this? Well, that's where they can't keep up with me. Does that say maybe you need to be watching them if they're there? Let me tell you something. And you might not like this very much at all, but you kind of alluded to it a little bit, Carrie. We need to be wherever our children are. If they are on TikTok, you need to be either on TikTok with them or be right there doing it. If they're playing some game on some gaming social network or something like that, if they're on Xbox or PS4 or whatever like that, you need to be on there with them, or you need to have access to be on there with them. Elders, deacons of this church, if your church is using those social networks, you need to be on them. I've heard from a lot of older elders that, well, you know, I don't mess with the Facebook. I just let the church do that. Your flock is on Facebook. You need to be there. Not watching, not lording over them there. You need to be with them there. You need to be connecting with them there as well. And again, these social networks, they offer wonderful ways of connecting. I'm going to say it tonight, but I'll go ahead and say it right here. If we look at social networks, just like the big ones, Facebook and Twitter, how would the apostles have used Facebook if they'd have had it? How would Paul have used Twitter? What if Jesus had had his own YouTube channel? I know the answer to all that. What if and how would they have used it? Well, they would have used all those things for the glory of God. And that is the thing that we need to teach our kids, is that whatever we do, whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord, right? And so we've got to teach our kids that even on the screens, even having fun on these social networks, even on Twitter and Facebook and all these other different things, we need to be glorifying God in all things. That's all there is to it. And if we teach our kids that, if we let them have that idea and they take that idea with them to college and they take that idea with them when they're in their mid-20s and they're getting married and they're having their own children, if we give them that idea, then that's going to be the most powerful thing that we could probably ever teach them, because this technology It's just going to keep becoming more and more a part of our life. I talk to older people all the time. Every time I go somewhere, an older person always tells me, well, if we just go back to flip phones, everything will be fine. And I use the argument against them. I say, okay, if you want to go back to flip phones, that is akin to putting an outhouse in your backyard and getting rid of all your indoor plumbing. That's how backwards that is. Because we're never going back, and we need to stop fantasizing about a world where we go back. These devices are with us, and every new technology that we've had has been feared first. Have you thought about that? The printing press 500 years ago was feared. Why? Print books with it, big idea. But that's it. It would convey big ideas to all people. It was seen as a very dangerous thing at the time, and people feared it. Every new technology has been feared, and I'm going to say this tonight, I'm kind of giving you spoilers for the sermon tonight a little bit, but when we think about these devices, how long have we had iPhones? Think about it. 2007. We've had them 12, 13 years maybe. And it seems like we've had them forever, doesn't it? But we're still in the infancy of this. It's very, very interesting to think about. Just things to get your thoughts moving there. Let's go to the next one. This right here is the predominant thing that I hear from kids talking about any social network these days. It's where I can say what I want to without being judged, and nobody knows who I really am. Those are two separate things if you kind of separate it. Came from the same person. I can say what I want to without being judged. I can talk to my girlfriend or the girl that I liked, right, over AOL Instant Messenger 22, 23 years ago, right? And I can say what I want to because I know my parents are not watching what I'm doing. That's the idea, Tim. I can do and say things and be under pseudo-names and have all sorts of different identities, and I can have all sorts of Finstagrams. If you don't even know what that is, it's called a fake Instagram account that people make, or kids make actually. And it's just a completely different account for whatever they want to do. All these different things. I get to do it without being judged. And then the idea of identity comes in play when somebody says, you know what, and nobody knows who I really am, so it's whatever I want. That's dangerous. We don't need to allow our kids to have that opportunity. Because again, we've had this idea that we can say and do with our thumbs on these tiny devices whatever we want. And there's no consequence for that, and that's completely wrong. We need to teach our kids that. Thoughts, questions, comments. Before we get to our suspicious apps here. How do you get on the Twitter? Easier than you think. A lot easier than you think.
You didn't ask how many have Twitter accounts.
I didn't ask how many have Twitter accounts. It's not very popular with kids, but they'll still go and they check it. The thing about Twitter is that you can go to twitter.com/whatever the username is, and you're there. It doesn't matter if it has pornographic content on it. It doesn't matter if it's President Trump. It doesn't matter what it is. You can go to it directly on the internet. Every username is accessible unless it is a protected account. Yes, sir.
Anonymity in social media is the same slogan that a lot of adults use regularly. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. It's exactly the same idea.
And to do that, let's go to the next slide up here. Kind of a good segue there. To do that, there are some of these apps, especially at the top, what I call anti-social apps. And these are apps that are deliberately designed to hide your identity. And every now and then, some of them will become very, very popular with kids, and there'll be this big influx of kids that get on it, and then it'll get outlawed by certain school systems and things like that. In fact, last September, when Los Angeles County, it was three of the biggest counties in the world. I think it's Los Angeles County, Cook County in Chicago, and then one county in Florida, maybe Miami-Dade in California, actually had this list of these 4 apps and a bunch of others on the front doors of the schools and said, if you've got any of these applications, take them off your phone or we'll delete them for you. because they have caused such a huge problem with something like after school. After school is, most of these, in fact, after school, Whisper, and Yik Yak specialize in geolocation, meaning in a certain radius from your phone's GPS, you can communicate with anybody that you want to. Now that sounds pretty cool for me. For being we used to have Big Spring Jam here in Huntsville. Big Spring Jam was the bee's knees, man. I love that. RIP, Big Spring Jam, right? And so we used to have that. I used to go every year in high school. I'd come back from the military. We'd go to it and stuff. It's great. And I would have loved to have something like After School or Yik Yak to talk to other people at that same event that I didn't necessarily know, right? That would have been neat. That's a neat kind of thing for it. But what do you think kids are using it for? Well, anything that we find can be used and abused. And kids are using things like Yik Yak and After School to make fun of administrators, other teachers, other students, not just to make fun of them, but to harass them, to bully them, to do anything, all these other different things. And teachers have had just a horrible time with some of these applications. Whisper is not necessarily geolocated, but it is risky in the fact of that it's the very name should tell you something, right? It is anonymous social networking. You don't necessarily know who you're talking to. And so a girl in Seattle was lured to a park in 2015 and raped just using that app. Now, I'm not to say that makes the app inherently evil, but it was used for an evil purpose. You can't necessarily use something like Facebook for that. Not saying Facebook is squeaky clean either. But when we think about this anonymity, that's very dangerous. It's the equivalent of what I joked about earlier, the white van with no windows pulling up and saying, "Hey kids, get in." That's the equivalent of that. And no longer do these guys have to creep around the school parking lots or the parks in town. They just have to be on these applications. And if you did not have physical access to your child's phone, and it doesn't matter if it's a boy or a girl, we're actually seeing a surge of boys having this issue, not just young women, but young boys having this issue too. Where almost the boys have overtaken the girls now and the things that happen to them because, again, they're so naive. We have to make sure that we're monitoring, that we're looking, that we're doing what we need to do to see what is on and what they're doing with their devices. Those last three, the streaming apps, I get asked a lot of questions about should I allow my kid to stream? And the answer is always no. You should never allow your kids to stream anything, period. They're not going to be the next YouTube star. They're not going to be Dude Perfect or whatever, doing slam dunks from 40 feet in the air. They're not going to be doing any of that kind of stuff, okay? So I would say absolutely do not allow them to do that. Now, what's funny about this is that Live.me has come under a lot of fire recently in the last probably year or so because it's largely unregulated. A group of Texas police officers in the state of Texas have taken it upon themselves to monitor young women's feeds specifically and basically find the guys that are trying to do very nefarious and possibly pornographic things or tell the girls to do those things. They're taking it upon themselves to do it because the company can't be held accountable. But then you look at something like Instagram or Periscope or any of the other applications, you can live stream with Facebook. The shooting in Australia last year was live streamed first on Facebook. That's crazy. We're living in a culture where, again, these devices don't just give us unlimited access and knowledge to everything, they give us the way to broadcast to the world. And that is incredibly enticing for kids. So again, we have to have those discussions. Thoughts? Questions?
It's scary to think that you can't take back what your child has seen or heard.
It is. It's very scary to think about that. In fact, I've had a lot of hard discussions. Since starting this, I never intended for this to get like it has. I started this with 4 Wednesday night sessions at the church I'm now employed at, actually. And it just snowballed from there. I didn't do any advertisement. I almost haven't done any advertisement to date. And it's just one of those things where I've been asked to come over and over again. And I've heard a lot of sad stories from a lot of people. A dad who called me, and you could hear the anger in his voice. Well, I want you to tell me how to get my daughter's pictures off of there. I can't do that. It's not possible. I didn't know what to tell him. Well, you're a whiz. You can do it. And he was angry at me. But he wanted to be angry at somebody because his daughter had posted inappropriate pictures of herself. And they had been distributed. Once you put something out there, it's out there. One decision with our kids these days. One decision at your job could get you fired. We have to teach our kids to be very discerning and very critical and very understanding of what is at stake with these things. And again, I don't want us to miss this. These can be phenomenal tools for communication, for collaboration, for entertainment, mostly. That's really what it is if you think about it. This is really just entertainment. But it can be phenomenal tools, but at the same time, we have to teach ourselves and teach our children how to use it wisely. Excellent observation, Sherry. Any other questions? The next session is long, and I will need every minute. And I hope that this one is the one that we go to and we talk about all the settings and the apps and the routers and all sorts of stuff. It's not as technical as you think, and it will not be as hard as you think, I promise. So let's take a 5-minute break, and probably about 3:45, let's be back in here, okay? Again, thank you so very, very much. spiel about it, and it's like, yeah, well, we're going spring break, probably gonna come back. It's like, wow. That's a little bit different. You got kids living in close quarters and things like that. Today, starting today, they're going to close down the park. Tomorrow, more than 2 weeks.
The guys talk about their business, but we're just barely making it. We're not raking in the money hand over fist. We're barely getting by. We shut down our businesses for 3 to 6 weeks. We're in debt beyond what we may be able to recover from. By the way, your mic's on. My daughter was telling me what we were talking about in between. Have you read the description of how many Chinese worldwide have died from the virus? It's like 50% of total count. It's not just the Chinese in Italy. It's the Chinese in other countries that are dying. Yes.
How old are they? Like old people or
For some reason, there may be a genetic predisposition to Chinese.
we should be saying?
No, probably not. There's going to be a lot of interesting things come out of eventually as they begin to put all the pieces together.
This week,
Why are you involved in
it'll be very interesting.
investigation?
Usually the people that die are like older and younger people just like so they did it. It's like an age.
Even in the United States, it's Chinese. Even the ones in the United States, Chinese. It's
What about the one in like
But some of the people in this larger room are on my Twitter account.
Is Twitter still just 40 characters?
No, it's 200.
I was thinking, you remember about Paul, you Twitter 40
I don't know why they doubled it. They doubled it a couple of years back. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Still not ahead. Once you hit 10, it's not ahead. You can't get over the
I'll figure some more out back here.
I guess I saw something, I was like, it's fine, man. I just thought only
Yeah, that was the first trigger.
Well, that's what I'll follow it, like, my speaker daughter's traveling. You violate that contract, I know.
And it's like, well, I saw one tire.
We lost it.
Fix that, it's
They like parchment.
Okay, let's go ahead and get back. I want to get done with this last session. Is probably our longest session because it'll probably have the most questions, which is completely fine. If at any point you have a question in this last session, go ahead and stop me. If I'm talking too fast, which I do have a bad habit in doing sometimes, go ahead and stop me and just raise your hand. I will try to answer your questions to the best of my ability. And again, this is we're living in a much different world than even just 5 or 6 years ago. The tools and resources for parents these days have really simplified themselves. It has gotten easier to use even really complex things like setting up your own wireless routers in your home, all sorts of different things. I'm going to put these out. Not going to pass them out right now, but we've got this resource guide that I had Ryan print out, and I think there's enough for everybody here, but it's got a list of links on the inside. If you download the PDF on my website, you can actually just click on those links and you don't have to type them in. But I've got 2 recommendations for the best parental control apps. Popular apps for kids and gaming, general how-to kind of stuff. And so download that. Again, I don't have any ads on my site or anything like that. I don't make any money when you click on stuff, and I'm not going to steal your data or anything like that. But there's also a question form on that page before you get to the slideshows, and you can ask me any kind of question that you want, and I will try to get you an answer if you have one. So I'll pass those out after we're done with this. But let's go ahead and talk about device control. Again, that's where you can find that page, activedigitalparenting.com, or you can go to my personal website, chadl.co/ADP, and that's also, it goes to the same place, so it doesn't matter. But if you go to my website, just poke around a little bit, look at some stuff I've written, look at some stuff you can download. I've got devotionals and classes and different things I've written on there. It's not too much, but it's something. And so again, if you have any questions, you want to email me, chad@graymere.com. The first session we talked about why we should be really paying attention. That one was kind of designed to be a little bit of a wake-up call. And I've seen parents and guardians and grandparents less and less need necessarily a wake-up call. They just need to know the dangers. 5 or 6 years ago, it was the argument of you got to start paying attention to this. And now it's more, well, you're paying attention, but you need to know this too, okay? In the second session, we talked about kind of what we're up against as far as social media, as far as what we say and how important that is. We talked about James chapter 3. And in this session, we're going to explore how we will better protect our children. How do you actually do that? Okay? So, in this next slide here, we're going to check out, and again, if you are not necessarily tech savvy, if you're don't keep up with stuff, you may not know that there is a difference. In fact, the average person, I believe there was a survey done, like 68% of people that walk into a cell phone store do not know the difference between the phones. Because they all look the same now, don't they? They all have generally the same looking apps. They all run the same kinds of apps. It's just a matter of what brand you want and how big a screen you want, and that's it, right? Well, I will tell you that's not the case. Because Apple, and we'll go ahead and say Google, who runs Android, they have very different views, very different philosophies on privacy and parental controls. And I'm not going to tell you either platform is better than the other, because they're right even keel with one another right now. They're exactly the same. They just do look at different things and they use your data different ways. Apple prefers a less open system, and what I mean by that is that they have kind of this walled garden approach. They want you to be inside their system. They want you to use all their stuff, their iMessage and their Macs and their iPads, and they want you to all interconnect everything together, and they're not going to allow. They have a lot stricter app submission, and they prefer to have parental settings on the device rather than to use another app for that. And so they would rather you just stay all on the device. If you'll know, you can't really change an iPhone that much. You can't customize an iPhone. You can't say, I want to use this text messaging app over this one or whatever. But a few years ago, I was not recommending iPhones to parents. I was actually recommending Android phones at that point because they allowed you to have deeper control and parental controls over the system. And now that has, again, kind of come even keel. So either one of these platforms that you have or that you're operating on right now is going to be great. You just need to know how to use it. Android is kind of right the opposite. They have a little bit more of an open system, although in the last few years they've kind of gotten a little bit more closed off. They have less strict app submission, and you will find that parental control settings are almost non-existent on Android devices, at least in the last generation of Android devices really kind of pumped that up really well. But as far as the devices that were made previous to 2018 or so, they made you want to download the apps and download Digital Wellbeing by Google, download Our Pact or Life 360 or any of those applications that we're going to talk about today. And so, again, different kind of philosophies here. You just need to know that. The only thing I can say, people always ask me, well, what do you recommend? Do you recommend a Google phone, an Android phone, or an iPhone? I say, well, stick with what you know. Because at this point, they're both so mature that you can get almost any app that you want parental control-wise. In fact, all the apps and services that I'm going to mention today work on both platforms. So that you can download, either you have an Android phone or an iPhone, they will work on all of them, okay? So just know that they have very different thoughts on privacy and parental controls. That last one I put Amazon down there because Amazon uses what's called a fork of Android for their operating system on their devices. And they use a skinned version. Their Kindles have they're basically skinned versions of Android on them. But that doesn't mean that you can download every Android app that you want. That doesn't mean that you have access to all the Google services. In fact, that's why they used Android, because Android is a whole lot more open. And so I put that on there because Amazon actually sold this last Christmas, they sold more Kindle Fire devices than they ever have in their history. And if you're using one of those for your children, those things are actually very cheap. They have good plans with them. They have something called Amazon Free Time, and you can download that and you can actually pay them $2 or $3 a month. And it's actually a very good solution if you have kids maybe under like 10 years old. And so we'll talk about that here in a minute. But again, I put them in there because they're such a big player as well. And so again, if you walk into a cell phone store, you may not know the difference, but there's a significant difference, okay? There will be no Apple phones that run Android and no Android phones that run iOS. And so just make sure that you keep that distinction separate. Let's go to the next slide. So I've got a few things on here before we kind of get into actual device control that you need to make sure of. I put up here, make sure your child hasn't purchased another device. Now I know what you might be thinking. You might be saying, well, my child's not going to have another phone. My eyes were opened, so to speak, at one workshop probably about 2 years ago. Apparently there is a gray market at our schools and high schools of all sorts of broken, unused devices. And it doesn't have to be a phone, an old iPhone doesn't have to be on a plan. It can just be used as an iPod Touch over Wi-Fi and it will still get on the internet. And so you'll have these kids selling these old broken devices that still kind of work for 20 and 30 and 40 bucks. And kids will take home these devices, they'll use these devices in place of their actual devices to do nefarious things, and their parents won't ever know about it. Well, if you put some of the things in place that I have here today with you, if you put some of the wireless routers in particular in place, you'll know exactly every single device that is on your network, and you will be able to cut it off like that. And especially with a device that your child has brought home that's not authorized, that you haven't authorized yourself, then you can say, I don't want this to have internet access. I don't know what that is. So it's very, very simple to do, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But again, make sure your child does not have another device. That's just kind of my point. Or a device your child you don't know about. It's very important to know. Make sure your child knows not to sign into someone else's iCloud or Google Play account. Now, why would I say that? What is the iCloud account on an iPhone control? Everything. Everything. Same with a Google Play account on an Android phone. It controls everything. You have access to parental controls. You have access to what is downloaded. You have access to credit card information. All of those sorts of things. I set up my boys' iPads. They each have a little iPad at home that's like 5 years old, and they're only allowed to use them kind of at home. And I set them all up to where they could have the same account because I gave them the Landman Boys account and things like that. And it would not let me download anything until I put in a credit card. I said, they're not going to be buying anything. It made me put in a credit card. So I went and bought one of those little temporary credit cards and used that instead. And it didn't like it. It made me go jump through a few more hoops with it, but it let me put that in there. So now they have their own account that I can control. And if you're thinking about, if you have your children, having them on your account versus having them have their own account, I will tell you right now, at least with Apple, on iOS devices, that it's probably more valuable to you to let them have their own account because you can exercise a greater number of control with that. You can shut down almost everything. For my boys, I've got almost everything shut down. And they've got their own screen time account, and I can see exactly what they've looked at. I can see how many hours they've been doing this, how many whatever in hours per week, and all sorts of different things. So I would invite you to kind of re-examine that. If you have them on one of your accounts, maybe separate those out and do the work and use family sharing or something like Google Play family sharing to share those applications that maybe you've already bought, movies and such. Okay, we'll talk about that here in just a little bit as well. Let's go back let's go back one. We went one too far. Make sure you have parental controls or restrictions set on whatever device your child uses. And again, that could be the Roku in your home, in your living room. That could be a Kindle Fire device. There's parental controls on that. Sometimes, and most of these devices nowadays, you can control the parental controls remotely, meaning you can control them from an app on your phone, anywhere you are. So if you've got a teenager that's out and about, is going out and stuff, and you want to see where she is or control what she sees on her phone or see what she sees on her phone, then there is apps and utilities to be able to do that, okay? And so you don't necessarily have to have physical access for the device. You should, but you don't necessarily have to have that, okay? Let's go to the next slide here. This is kind of what I propose as kind of a three-walled approach to kind of digital parenting here. The first wall here and your first line of defense is kind of a filter on your Wi-Fi network at your home. And again, we're only talking about your home because you can't control necessarily what's here at the church. You can't control necessarily what's at the kids' school. And I know there's a lot of probably consternation. Do we have any teachers in here? Any teachers? Okay. So you probably hear from parents all the time and you're probably going back and forth with the kids, the IT guys at school. Why do the kids, are they able to do this at home and then they come here and they can't do it and vice versa and all, and it's a little bit confusing and there's wires crossed sometimes. I hear it at every school, so you're not the only one dealing with it. But what I hear all the time is that why can the filters and stuff, they work for them at school, but they don't work when they get home. Well, it's because they're on a different Wi-Fi network. And your Wi-Fi network, believe it or not, you can secure and you can put a firewall in place very, very easily, okay? So that's what I propose as kind of the first line of defense, something like OpenDNS, and we'll talk about these all in depth here in just a second, but a filter that you can put on your Wi-Fi router that will actually filter everything that connects to your Wi-Fi at home. The second wall is a third-party app, and when I say third-party app, that means an app not made by Apple or an app not made by Google on a Google phone. I've got Life 360 and HourPact up here right now, and you should always start with Screen Time on iOS and Family Link on Android. That should be the places where you start, and we'll talk about that here in a second as well. And the reason why I say that, I used to give people this long list of parental control apps. There's a lot of them. But right now, in my opinion, and based upon parents that I've talked to, based upon things that I've read and the usage that I've got out of these two apps, Life 360 and HourPact are the best. If you have a teenager, especially Life 360, any kid of any age, HourPact is very, very appropriate. And we'll talk about those here in a minute. And then lastly, the most time-consuming one is that wall number 3. And that's your app-by-app audits. And we're going to specifically talk about Netflix and YouTube because I want to point something out on those different things. But if your child uses TikTok, if your child uses Snapchat, if you allow them to use Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, have you ever looked at Facebook's privacy controls? It's like trying to pass something through Congress. It's unbelievably detailed and amazing, right? And amazing in a bad way. You look at some of the privacy controls of making a protected account on Twitter or making a locked account on Instagram. Your children should have that. all the time, because you do not want somebody just following them that you don't approve first or they don't approve first, okay? So again, make sure that you look at app by app, and that is what's going to take the most time. It's going to be another full-time job for you. But if you allow your child to use it, you need to be looking at those settings every other week almost, checking them, make sure that those settings have not been deactivated, turned off, and whatnot, okay? Let's go to the next slide. By the way, any questions so far? I don't want to go too far too fast. I know we got services starting here in about an hour. So, OpenDNS. OpenDNS is the most complex thing I'll talk about all day, okay? And it's really not that complicated, it sounds complicated. So OpenDNS stands for Open Domain Name System. It is a very easy to use, very free wireless filter for every and all devices that you want to put it on. You can put it on individual devices, or you can put it on your Wi-Fi router. You can program your Wi-Fi router at home so that everything that connects to it has to go through the filter. Does that make sense? And so it's kind of a firewall for your home, personal firewall for each device. If you give them $20 a year, they will give you something called history and whitelist mode, and they will actually email you a history of all the websites, all of the different apps and stuff that have been downloaded on that phone over the course of a week. And you will get an email sent to your inbox every single week. It's very, very fantastic. Now again, this does not cover things like Twitter inside of the Twitter app, or YouTube videos inside of the YouTube app. This only covers things like internet websites and stuff, places where you go like the App Store, looking at different apps and different things like that. And so OpenDNS is very powerful. Lots of companies, lots of big companies actually use this. I know we use this at Graymere, and we have a pretty advanced package to where we can actually see the traffic as it happens on a computer screen in our server room. And you would be surprised what we see, what people are typing up on their phones and on their iPads during a worship service. It would surprise you. And so when we think about that, again, filters, this is where you need to start. OpenDNS, just one solution. Now, a lot of these are going to overlap. In fact, you shouldn't use more than probably one filter at a time. So it's not like putting 3 coffee filters under a it's not like that. It's not like it's going to make the coffee less. You're just going to have a lot more confusion and stuff is going to break. So I would only use one of these tools at a time. If you've got a filter at home, a system like a Circle, or maybe even a system like Eero that we're going to talk about here in a second, if you've got something that works for you, don't change it. Okay? Don't change for change's sake. So again, OpenDNS, one of the easiest, most open alternatives. Let's go to the next slide. Circle, and they used to say with Disney, now they don't say with Disney. I don't really know what that means or necessarily, but I've heard from a lot of people that this device, it's an actual Wi-Fi device that you can buy for your home, is actually very, very good for their kids, especially if you have smaller kids. I've heard from parents that really use it. They give you a simple app to use that you can use on your phone and control everything from the app. So you're not going and pulling cables and resetting things and turning things over. You're not doing any of that. You're doing it all from your phone, okay? And this is going to be the case for all of these things. And in fact, I haven't lived here in a very long time. What is the predominant internet service y'all have out here?
Out here?
Yeah, just out Mediacom? Okay. And so do they allow you to have your own wireless router, or do y'all know?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So if they allow it, then that's great. We actually have a electric co-op. Our utility company in Columbia actually gives us really great internet in the city of Columbia, and they allow us to have all of our own equipment. They just provide the copper to get to the house, and then what you do with that is your business after that. And so that sounds a lot like Mediacom is doing. They're just providing the service, and then you can use your equipment. I would always, if you're able to use your own equipment, use your own equipment. And I would always say, if you cannot remember the last time that you upgraded your equipment, it's time to upgrade your equipment. Because if you look at your router and it's got a layer of dust on it that thick, and you go, I think it's time to upgrade the router. Hadn't been upgraded since 1999. So it's probably time to upgrade your router, okay? So again, these new routers are relatively cheap, very, very good at what they do. They will make your internet speed faster, and the coverage will be better throughout your home. I almost guarantee it. But this Circle Devices actually provides this kind of all-in-one kind of thing. So if you get something like this, then you don't need something like OpenDNS. And you don't need something like the Eero system that we're going to talk about next. Okay? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Your own router, are you saying it's not acceptable to do OpenDNS, or?
You can use it. In fact, you could use it kind of double up on it, but if you have something like this, where there's going to be that automatic filter that you can just touch of a button on the app and enable it, then there's no reason to have OpenDNS. But OpenDNS would be only for something maybe like you have a router at home, but you can't replace it. So if anybody has AT&T internet service at home, they are notorious for not allowing you to use your own equipment first, but they don't want you to make any kind of changes. They don't want you to replace the equipment. They don't want you to do anything to it. They just want to hook it up and you use it as it is. But something using OpenDNS in a situation like that would be very, very good. So if you can't necessarily replace your equipment, OpenDNS would be good. Let's go to the next one. This is the one I actually have at home. Others are kind of like, I know they all have weird sounding names, but they sell these at Walmart. Google Home is kind of in this, Google Wi-Fi is kind of in the same ballpark. They're going to give you a lot of the same kind of parental controls. But I like Eero. I bought an Eero device about a year or two ago, and it has been just fantastic. They've got a simple app that you can use. And again, it's one of these things where if you plug this up to your internet at home, you're going to be able to see a list of every single device that's on your network. And you're going to be able to go, I don't know what that is. Click, and then you shut it off. They don't get internet anymore. And so you can use that for other purposes as well, if you want to. You can say, oh, you didn't clean your room. Your internet's gone. You can just do whatever you want to with that. So all sorts of different things. You can pause internet access, schedule access. This is what we do at home. So from 6 to 7 p.m., my boys get their iPad time. It's everybody's iPad time. We're all on our devices and we're all zombies and we're all looking at stuff like that, right? And I know exactly when 7 o'clock has arrived. Why? Because my router says time is up, the internet stops on the devices, there's a little pop-up that comes up on the screen, your internet has been paused, and I hear the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. Oh, Daddy! And it's like, okay, let's just go to the bathtub. Let's go. It's time to go to the bathtub. And it's kind of our bedtime routine starts right there at 7 o'clock. And so if you need to schedule access, if you want to shut off the internet overnight, if you want your child to be able to have their device, but it be a paperweight, you can do this. In fact, some of the other in-depth parental control apps on Android will allow you to even remotely turn off their LTE connection, their cell phone connection, which is incredibly valuable. I don't think you can do that on Apple yet. I don't think they want you to do that on Apple yet, but you can turn that off as well. And so here, gets them off of Wi-Fi, and you can just make the phone a paperweight overnight. Okay? So again, look at any of the ones, Eero, Google Home, or Google Wi-Fi. I think Google Home is the other one that they have. Orbi. There's a Linksys one called Velop. That's pretty good as well. If you have not upgraded your Wi-Fi in a while, now might be the time to do that, because I almost guarantee that you'll get better speed and coverage, plus you'll get all these features. I don't know what Mediacom has to offer as far as parental controls. But I know that bigger companies like Comcast and with their Xfinity products and things like that have some of this stuff already built in. And so you might even ask Mediacom or ask whoever your cell phone provider is what kind of parental control apps they have. And that might actually put you in the right direction for that as well. Any questions?
I think Orbi, that's 110.
Yeah, that's Tim Orbison's brand there, the Orbi. I didn't even think about that. Okay, let's go to the next slide here. There we go. The place that you need to start, like I said before, is Google Play Family Link for Android and then Screen Time. You will be astounded at the level of things that you can turn on and off with Screen Time and with the Google counterpart, Google Family Link. There's all sorts of settings that you can turn on and off. I have most of my settings behind Screen Time because my boys haven't gotten to an advanced stage of needing advanced digital parenting yet. So I usually just use Screen Time on their devices. And you wouldn't believe what you can do with it. You can set those time limits without even a router. You can set time limits on apps. You can say, I don't want you to use this app anymore. I don't want you to use YouTube Kids for more than 30 minutes a day. I don't want you to use this app. You can say this app is available at all times. I turn off the camera. I turn off the internet browser. Those icons don't even appear on the screen. When you have the internet and when you have the camera turned off, no other app that uses the camera or the internet can use it either. So that's very valuable to know. And so you're not gonna, I hear from people all the time that'll treat these devices like Windows computers from the 90s, and you're not gonna get like a blue screen of death or anything when you flip these switches for your kids. You're not gonna break it. And if you do mess it up, you can just reset the thing and start over. It's not a big deal. And so again, get in there, spend some time on these screen time applications and flipping those switches appropriately, okay? All right, any questions?
Yeah, so
Yes, ma'am.
that stuff you're talking about would control it if you're on Wi-Fi or the actual cell provider.
That's correct.
Like the filters that you talked about originally would only be on Wi-Fi.
Yes, ma'am. Well, no, the filters now, OpenDNS has something to where if you add it to the device, it doesn't matter where they go. So they can be out on LTE, and something like the Circle Go service is out on LTE, works on LTE as well. And the apps that we're going to talk about with OurPact and Life360, those work over LTE as well. So none of this just works at your house. You want to make sure something works everywhere they go. Okay? Good question. Any other questions? Okay. Screen time, this is kind of what it shows you. It's very interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about screen time during my digital addictions tonight. And it might, if you've never turned it on your device before, I would invite you to do that because you'll be very surprised what you spend time doing. And if you've never turned it on your child's device before, you will be even more surprised at what it comes up with. And the real funny thing is that they send you a screen time report every Sunday at 9 a.m. And so right when church is starting, it's kind of like this wake-up call, like, you spent 12 hours on Twitter this week. You're a bad person. Like that. And it's like, I'm in church, I'm in the right place. You know, it's like you think about it. So that's kind of an interesting thing. And I don't know if you can set that to be another time or what, but it's just automatic. I don't have notifications turned on for almost anything, so I see it later, but it's still, I think it's very comical. But yeah, let's go to the next slide. I've got this cheat sheet for iOS on my website as well. You can actually just go through these, and a lot of these, you know, number one, may take you like an hour. And these are not just little checklist items. These things are like, you need to go inside of these different things and kind of look at them. But this is kind of like a little checklist. I like the fingerprint passcode thing. It's more like a fingerprint face thing right now. Did you know on the new phones that you can actually have 2 faces on the new phones? You can have 5 fingerprints, so I would always invite you to put your fingerprint as well as your child's fingerprint on those devices. But then you can do what on iOS, at least for Face ID, you can set up what's called an alternate appearance. And so for my phone, for example, I have obviously my face, but then I have my wife's face as the alternate appearance. And so at any time, my wife can get on my phone at any time. I don't have anything to hide. So if you have something to hide, then don't do that. What were you about to say?
No, I was just agreeing.
Yeah, so that's a good, and that's the strategy that I've heard, and I love the fact that they have the alternate appearance thing to where you can actually have somebody else's face on it. It's only a matter of time before you can be able to add multiple faces to it as well. And again, just go through these different things. We won't go through all of them, but you can actually, it keeps track of your social media accounts. Game Center is actually a big one for young boys. You can actually check and see, make sure audit the settings in that. Privacy settings, there's all sorts of privacy settings. And then this last one, number 8, is family sharing. Let's go to the next slide. Family sharing, how many of y'all, do y'all have any family sharing set up on iOS? Anybody? Okay, so family sharing is really, really neat. My wife and I have family sharing set up, and we can share everything, even storage. So we have a big block of storage that we pay for every month. And because she, again, documents our kids like it's National Geographic all the time, she has 1 million photos. And so we share that, and I can see her photos as well, but she can also use my storage space, use our family's storage space. Well, then we got a sub-account for our boys, that is a teenager's account, or not a teenager's account, but a young person's account. Rather, you can actually say this is a child's account. And you can go in there and have that be family sharing as well. And the cool thing about this is, next slide, please. The cool thing about this is that when they request to buy something, even a free application, it doesn't matter where they are, it doesn't matter where you are. You could be in the same house or you could be across the country. It's going to send you a little notification that says, hey, so-and-so wants to buy this. And I'm going to tell you right now, always default to no. I mean, that's like my new favorite word as a parent. No, 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 no. Every single form of it, right? And just say no. You can always go back and say yes, that they can download this later. But if it's something that's relatively that they need for school or something or whatever like that, then you can obviously approve it and say yes. That is one of the ways that you can just have almost absolute control over the device. Google Play Family Link gives you the same kind of features when you're using Android devices as well. It sends you a notification, you have to approve it, and then they can download it from the Google Play Store. Okay, any questions? All right, let's move on. Find My iPhone. Go enable Find My iPhone, or it's called Find My now. Go enable Find My on, if you have an iOS device, and they have the same thing with Google Play Family Link. Go enable it, because I bet you there's somebody in here that has not done it and they think that they have. Case in point, there was a girl on a mission trip to Arizona. We were out on an Indian reservation, okay? She was playing basketball, lost her phone. It is pitch black dark, okay? Middle of nowhere. And I looked at the mom and I said, well, just pull up Find My iPhone and hit the play sound thing and it'll squeal a sound and then you'll find it. And she goes, we haven't set it up yet. Set it up. It's free. On Google Family Link, set it up. It's free. And it will be, you will remember that I said this when you need to find your child's phone one time. Or, and I can't say that I actually did this, you put your phone on top of your car and you drove off with it. Can't say I did that. Might have been in a million pieces when I found it, but I did find it. It was still registering on Find My iPhone. So again, do it. It's free. Now, or you can find your child too. That's absolutely that's a good way to do it as well. But yeah, just enable that. Go, and it's a free service. Let's go to the next slide. Google Play Family Link. Just kind of going through these. This is what it looks like, and you can download it on your Google devices. Next slide. You can connect your kid's device. You can it says guide them to good content. You can manage all the apps. You can do a lot of, again, you see the overlap on a lot of these different things. You can just use all these services to your advantage. Is anybody, school systems here, do they have Chromebooks that y'all use or anything like that? Okay, so if you recommend an app for them to use, Chromebooks can now use Android apps. And so if you recommend an app for them to use, it'll show up like a phone app on their screen, but they can still use it as well. And so it can guide them to kind of good content, to search teacher recommended apps as well. Let's go to the next slide. It'll go all these other different things. You can see their location. Again, that's just like Find My iPhone. You can lock their device. You can set screen time limits. And when you lock their device, I mean, it is everything but texting and phone calls. I mean, it becomes an actual phone again. And so you can do that with OurPact. You can also do that with Life 360, I believe. You can make these things actual phones again, so your children have to pay attention to you. So unless they're ignoring you, which I hope they're not. But this is also what you can do. Kind of moving on here, Life 360. And any questions about Google Play Family Link? Y'all stop me if I'm going too fast. Life 360, I have heard that from a lot of parents. Anybody know about this app? I've heard from a lot of parents. Maybe they don't even have drivers or not. Maybe they just try to keep up with their kids. That this app is fantastic. Have y'all found that y'all use it?
See when he drives by Publix, and I can be like, hey, stop.
There you go. There you go. Hey, I know how fast you're going. And you can also see for teenagers, especially teenagers that are driving, or if you've got teenagers who have other teenage friends who are driving, you can see how fast they are going. And so you can literally get speed alerts like, oh, they're going 75 on I-65. It's like, no, you pull that over, or something like you can call them or whatever you want to do. But it's basically Find My iPhone on steroids. You get location history if you sign up for the Plus plan. And do y'all have the Plus plan, or do y'all just use it for free?
For free.
Yeah, the free version gives you a lot. So test it out and see if you like it. And if you want those extra features, you can get that as well. You get roadside assistance, driver monitoring, crime alerts. It's really valuable if you let your kids, if they're 16, 17, 18 years old, they go to concerts or something like that. If there's a crime in the area, it's going to alert your phone and their phone. If it has a low battery, if their phone has a low battery, it's going to tell them to charge first. It's going to then send you a message and say, your child's phone is low on battery, tell them to charge. I mean, also all sorts of stuff. So it gives you a lot, it will irritate you with your doing with your child. And it'll do, what's it called, location tagging. And so it will say, like you just said, I know when he's going by Publix. Well, it knows when your child, you can set it for a geolocation of your house and say, I want to know when my child gets home. I want to know when they arrive at home or when they leave. And it will send you a notification for that. Very, very handy. Super powerful app. Any questions about that?
I just tell you, the free stuff that we have, I zoomed in one time at the mall and pinged the exact store where she was walking, which surprised me because I was inside of the building. But
and those things are plus or minus 50 feet. They're not incredibly accurate with the GPS sometimes, but sometimes they are.
yeah.
In fact, the same thing happened, you're talking about that with Find My iPhone. My wife I gave her AirPods for her birthday, and she has just used them like crazy. She loves them. And she lost them this week. And I said, have you done the Find My iPhone thing? And she's like, well, it says it's in the bedroom. And I'm like, what? It's like, it says it's in the bedroom. You know what she had been doing? She was out gardening right at the wall that's right up next to the bedroom in the backyard, and one of them it was on like in a pocket, and they had dropped out. They were in the backyard. So it was fairly accurate. I mean, up to like 10 feet, it was accurate. So again, being able to find these things, and sometimes how many times has your child lost a device? I mean, come on. That's what it's valuable for as well. So any questions? Comments? Okay. The other one is that you may have not heard of. Actually, we'll get to RPACT in a second. Free Time Unlimited. Now, this is only for Kindle Fire devices, and that's why I bring it up. But if you have a younger child and they have a Kindle Fire device and they're very inexpensive, you can use this, and it's based upon your Amazon account. You can log in and see everything that they've done. It's basically all the great parental controls that we've talked about for Kindle Fire devices. My 8-year-old, Jacob, he does not like Free Time Unlimited because of the Learn First, Play Later feature. It makes him do math problems for 5 minutes before he goes and watches his videos and does whatever his games and things like that. And so it's kind of very, very good for that. And again, I think if you buy a Kindle Fire device, especially around Christmas time, they give you some insane deal, like they give you the tablet for $80 and they give you this crazy bumper case for it, and then they give you this for free for like a year, and it's a pretty good deal. Any comments on that? Okay, let's keep moving. Let's talk about, real quick, let's talk about YouTube and Netflix. We're good on time here. Y'all subscribe to Netflix, anybody? Okay, so how many of y'all had trouble issues or anything like that with Netflix, with kids seeing what you don't want them to see? So Netflix actually has a really good way that they do parental controls, in my opinion. What you got to do is you got to go to the Netflix.com. You can't necessarily do it on your browser, but you have to do it on your app rather, but you have to go to Netflix.com. You scroll down, let's go to the next slide. And then you just hit parental controls right there, okay? Let's go to the next slide. And then you have this kind of matrix or kind of a timeline here of what you're going to allow. Now, this is my account. This is my wife's and my account. And we only allow up to PG-13, TV-14. That limits a lot of what we see because I don't want to see NC-17 or TVMA or any of that kind of stuff. I just don't want to see it. And so when I put that in there for my wife and I, that's what we have. But one thing that Netflix added not too long ago was this ability to restrict specific titles. Now, that comes in really handy. And I'm not saying that it comes in really handy for something like Dora the Explorer. I'm not saying that. But it comes in handy when you don't want to hear Dora anymore, okay? But it also comes in handy if you have a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old who's watching Netflix in your house. And 2 summers ago, if you had it set to this, teens, PG-13, TV-14, the first thing they would see was a movie or a series called 13 Reasons Why. Now, can anybody tell me what that series was about? Suicide. And it wasn't just about suicide. It wasn't about somebody who committed suicide. It was about glorification of suicide. Making suicide okay. No, ma'am. No, sir. Suicide is not okay. And I do not want my kids potentially binge watching a show where the character is glorified in suicide. I don't want them seeing it. And so, but yet that was the banner thing, the first thing, the huge thing that popped up on any Netflix app for several weeks if you had teenager enabled. But since they added this specific title, in fact, 13 Reasons Why is why they added this restrict specific titles section, I can go in there and restrict any kind of title. It's kind of like Google autocomplete. You just start typing in the thing and it'll pop up, you click on it and it'll put it on the list. Done. It's very, very good, very effective. So even if you've got it set to your older kids, your TV Y7 and PG, if there's something specific that you don't want them to see, you can just go right in there and put it in. And then make sure I don't have it up here, but there's a pin code right above this on the screen. And that way your child can't log on to it, change it, or unrestrict those titles or anything like that. So there's a pin code on this as well. Very important. Now, any questions about Netflix before we move on? Let's go to YouTube. This is a screenshot. Let's go back one. This is a screenshot of the YouTube app for iPad. And it's very similar on any kind of Google Chrome device or any website, thing like that. You're going to see a lot of the same settings. But what do you see that's wrong with this picture? I click on my little avatar up there, and I scroll about halfway down the settings. I don't have to put in a password. I don't have to put in a PIN code. I don't have to do anything, and yet I have those options. Now, what's wrong with that? Everything's wrong with that. Because not only I could almost understand clear watch history and clear search history. That's normal stuff. But then you get into this pause watch history and pause search history. Are you kidding me? That's just asking for a young man or a young woman to go in there, click those little buttons, look at something or search something that they're not supposed to, remember to go back and unclick those buttons, and guess what? You, the parent, don't know any difference. Because of this, and this is still the way it is, I check every single time before digital parenting to see if they've changed it, and they haven't changed it. But you don't have to have a password to get to this. If you had to have a password or a PIN code to get to this, I would say, well, yeah, that's fine. If they want to do that, that's fine. But there's no password, no PIN code for this. And so because of this, I can't even recommend the YouTube app for your child's phones. Can you find pornography on YouTube? Yes. Now, it's almost unrecognizable because they have to do this weird thing with the algorithms. Google is based upon visual algorithms, in case you didn't know. Or Google has YouTube based upon visual algorithms. And if it detects anything as being pornographic, it will flag it and remove it almost immediately. It will not allow it to be published. But what these smart Alecks have done is they have made these videos with like white dots over it so the algorithm gets thrown off. You can still very much make out what's happening. They'll put a bad music video up there or a pornographic video or something else like there, and they can still find it. Okay? So again, with this, I would force your kids to use YouTube in the browser. And what does it do? Then it kicks them out to the browser. Then your filters that you set up kick right in for that. So if YouTube's safe search doesn't kick in, then you'll have your OpenDNS or your Orbi or your internet filters kick in for you. And so, the internet, using YouTube on the web it's kind of clunky, it's not preferable, but I would tell you right now, I would not allow your kids to have the YouTube app on their phone or on their tablet. Just for that very reason. And I've emailed them several times about this. It's not going to make a difference, but I just don't understand why it's not protected by a passcode.
That would be the same thing for Roku TV, I guess.
Right, yes. Now, on that respect, you can actually, so for Roku TV and for Apple TV, If you have one of those connected boxes to your TV, what you can do is you can set a passcode for every app above a certain age range. So for every app above Y7, we have a PIN code that we have to type in every time we go to a YouTube app, or YouTube TV for that matter. And so on the Apple TV, we have to do the 1, 2, 3, 4. We have to do it every single time, and it's very annoying. And we have to change it all the time because we have smart little 8-year-old and 5-year-old boys that they look around the corner and see us putting in the passcode, you know, on this giant 60-inch TV. And so, yeah, we've got to change it, and it's hard to, I'll get several phone calls every now and then. My wife will be like, "Did you change the code?" And I'm like, "Yes, I forgot to tell you. You've got to tell me when you change the code." You know, and that's just how life is these days, right? And so, yes, but you can pin, I know on an Apple TV that you can pin protect every app that you want to, so they can't open it. So my 8-year-old will come to me and he'll go, "YouTube, please." He'll just give me the remote. He'll have the remote ready for me. He'll, "YouTube, please." And I'll let him, supervised, I'll let him watch YouTube, and he'll scroll and he'll watch Winnie the Pooh and all sorts of stuff, right? But yeah, you can, and I think you should be able to do the same thing on Roku. I'm not sure about that though. Any other questions?
I know on Roku you got to have a PIN, I think, to purchase or put an app on.
That's correct. I do know that's true.
I hadn't looked into that.
Yeah. And Apple TV has been, it's kind of, I don't like the remote, and they didn't have Amazon Video for a while, and now they do, but it's very, very good. And if you get a 4K, I think it's $150 for the box, and it's a pretty nice experience, and you can download pretty much anything you want. And it's been pretty good for us as well. So if you're looking for a box, and it'll run YouTube TV. We've never had cable at our house. We've been there 5 years and never had cable. That's crazy. But we have YouTube TV, and so it works out pretty well. Any other burning questions? Let's keep going here. And this is kind of your Android. We're almost done. I do promise you that. This is kind of your Android cheat sheet. And you go to the Play Store app. You've kind of got to turn on parental controls and create a PIN from there. And then you can kind of move on and do that. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the last slide. And this is something that I'll tell you about. Contact your carrier. If you're having trouble with the device, managing what's coming to it, managing different people bullying or anything like that. AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile and Sprint, I have all called customer services for parents or with parents. And they can be surprisingly helpful over the phone. My one recommendation to you is the thing that everybody at first wants to do is, well, my phone is not doing something that I want it to do. Or my kid is getting messages that I don't want them to get, so I'm going to walk to a Verizon store and go in and ask them about it. Don't do that. Because those people are good and they know their stuff, but they're there to sell you phones, not there to fix your phones. And so I have found that calling your individual customer service for those, whatever company that you use, Verizon, AT&T, whatever, calling them and talking to them is much more helpful than walking into a store. Because you're just going to kind of get the runaround in a store, and there might be a guy that knows what he's talking about, and there might not. But anytime you call the customer service, they're going to be able to direct you to whoever you need to talk to. And so with that said, you can do all of these things through your cell phone provider. There was a woman at Graymere that was having trouble with her daughter texting and receiving texts from somebody that she didn't want them to. And it got to a point where she had to turn off the phone. I was like, look, you don't need to turn off the phone. Just call your company and turn off texting. You can do that? Yeah, you can do that. You can turn off all SMS texting. In fact, if you've had trouble with iMessage or SMS, if you've had trouble with texting, then you can always turn it off. But the thing about texting is that on iPhones, it doesn't go through the SMS system. It goes through iMessage. It's the difference between blue bubbles and green bubbles. There's actually a big thing with teenagers about that. I have no idea. If they see a green bubble, they're like, oh man, that's so bad that you can't you can't get a blue bubble. I don't know what it is, but it's a whole thing with them, okay? And so what you're looking at for that is that all you got to do is go inside the text messaging under settings and flip off iMessage. That's all you got to do. And then the text messages default to the SMS system. And then you can call, if you're an admin on the account, you can call your carrier, Verizon or AT&T, and you can get a full text transcript of everything that was said to and fro on those text messaging texts. Very valuable. You can do anything. You can deactivate personal hotspots. I would make sure to shut that off. If you have a little kid, shut it off. Absolutely don't allow them to use a personal hotspot at all. Limiting data is very important this day and age, I know, and so you can actually limit your child's data to a certain point, and then it becomes a snail's crawl. They can still use the internet, but it'll be very, very slow. And again, you can block a number from calling, block a number from texting. They can be very, very helpful. I know that I didn't cover everything today, so what questions do you have, if any? If you don't have questions, that means I covered everything.
How do you get on Twitter again?
How do you get on Twitter? So you go to twitter.com. I will tell you, this is a winnable battle. It may not seem like it, especially what I've just said to you today. But this battle is a very winnable one. And it has never been, I say this, it has never been easier for parents to take control of their child's digital development than right now. 5 years ago, I couldn't say that. But the tools that we have these days, I think that the generation of kids that we're seeing now, I think are going to be the best and the brightest that the world has ever seen. I really do. The only way that they're going to be the best and brightest is that if we help them do that. We've got to do what we need to do to protect our kids. I think this will be the greatest generation of kids to grow up and lead the church that's ever been seen in the history of the church. I really do. But we've got to do our job to protect them. Has this been helpful for you today? Okay, let's go ahead and close with a prayer. We've got about 20 minutes until worship services. Thank y'all for being here today. Thank you to the online audience for being here today. I don't know where the camera is, or else I'd look into the camera. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate everything that you have inviting me here. And let's go ahead and go to God in prayer, and let's end our workshop. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for the wonderful blessings that you have given us. Lord, we thank you so much for the most wonderful blessing that we have, and that's our children. We thank you so much for the blessing of being their parents, and Lord, we know that you have deliberately picked us on purpose to be these specific children's parents. We ask that you help us, give us the wisdom and the tenacity and the vigilance to do what we need to do to keep our kids protected while they're using these fantastic devices. And Lord, help us to use this technology in a way that would always glorify you. Help us to teach our children how to use this technology in a way that was always going to glorify you. Lord, we thank you so much for these parents here today, as well as the ones that are viewing online. We thank you for all the parents who are out there struggling and trying to teach their kids how to use this technology for good. Lord, we thank you so much for your son, Jesus, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Thank y'all very much. Yes, let's pass out the workbooks. Thank you for reminding me.
I can take some of them for you if you want me.
Yeah.